Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. On this episode, we're exploring a tale of psychological warfare, media manipulation, and the cold calculus of power. And yes, it's all happening in a place where air raid sirens have become a mainstay of everyday life, namely Ukraine. The media landscape has been dominated by talks of peace and negotiations. However, there is much more to the internal politics of Ukraine, and public opinion doesn't always go in line with the government's vision. So, without further ado, let's take stock of all that in our latest report.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine changed the lives of millions of Ukrainians irrevocably. As the war's third year is right around the corner, the burden of carrying on with the conflict is becoming a very heavy one. Ukraine's people are aware of what is at stake, as always.
Imagine the Russians come into your house. They tell you, we're taking over the kitchen and one bedroom, but we're only leaving you one bedroom and you can't go to the toilet. You can no longer prepare a meal or take a shower.
A recent poll for Ukrainska Pravda shows, however, that around half of Ukrainians support reaching some sort of settlement to end the war. These voices can be found even among the Ukrainian military. Many young men have had their lives upturned or have lost their lives in a bid to defend their country. All are in agreement that they will fight for as long as is necessary, but the constant fighting, the war, the battle, they have all exacted a heavy toll, leaving divided views among the soldiers in their wake.
I just want to go home. I also want guys who have been here for 2 or 3 years and are tired. How many of our men have died in the infantry and everywhere, guys? And to take and give like that? No.
When the war started, enlistment wasn't seen as a huge problem. Yes, there were those who dodged the draft or tried to flee the country, but there was an overwhelming sense of a need to fight for the country, no matter the cost. In 2025, Ukraine is facing a shortage of able troops. There have been pushes to lower the age of conscription. As for the civilians, many have been evacuated over the course of the war. The livelihoods they once had are either under Russian occupation, destroyed by the invaders, or simply gone. After 3 years, many Ukrainians have settled in new areas, and some seek a semblance of peace. A way to properly restart their lives as opposed to clinging on to dreams of regaining what once was. Ukraine doesn't want its leaders to simply give up the fight. But there's a growing number of Ukrainians who say that some sort of settlement, with proper security guarantees, a ceasefire, closer ties to the West, and one involving other partners, is preferable to another year of warfare.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. Let's start with the obvious. War is exhausting. Even when the front lines are hundreds of kilometers away, it's the enduring of constant air raid warnings, the relentless hum of air defense systems. Ukrainians have become unwitting veterans of a psychological battle that is more insidious than any conventional weapon. It's not just about bombs and bullets, it's about fear, intimidation, and the deliberate erosion of the human spirit. And while Moscow meticulously hammers away at the foundations of Ukrainian society, they're also busy crafting a narrative that could rival the worst of reality TV drama. While the offensive continues unabated, we've started to see whispers of a temporary peace on the horizon. Temporary peace, not victory. This is a vital distinction, much like the difference between a rundown motel and a luxury resort. A temporary ceasefire might sound like coming up for air, but it's also a dangerous breeding ground for manipulation. Under the guise of pausing the fighting, Vladimir Putin will be using every trick in the book to meddle with Ukraine's internal affairs. Democracy, as it turns out, is not immune to the influence of, let's just say, external puppeteers. The Kremlin's been busy crafting narratives meant to diminish and meddle in Ukraine ever since the days when Kiev in 3 days became a running joke, a meme born of hubris and the underestimation of Ukrainian resolve. The plan, you see, is as old as time. Remove the incumbent, install a pliable leader, and voila, you have a new government dancing to Moscow's tune. Even if Putin agrees to a long-term ceasefire, he's not exactly penning a love letter to President Zelensky anytime soon. Instead, he's plotting behind closed doors, intensifying efforts to oust Zelensky in favor of someone who would be far easier to control and manipulate. And while some may scoff at the idea that Ukraine could ever fall into the Russian trap, History is replete with examples where democracies have been subverted from within. Consider Georgia, once a proud beacon of democracy, which has now become the Georgian dream, which is really the Russian dream if you actually look at it in greater detail. This also is something of a global pattern. The United States, France, Germany, you name it. In each of these countries there have been cases where Russian interference has been casting a long shadow over democratic processes. And let's not forget Moldova and Romania, which have felt the sting most recently and most intensely, with Romania's 2024 first-round election even being annulled as a result. The sad part is that democratic elections themselves are not a cure-all, far from it. In times of war, a hasty election is like signing your own death warrant. If your enemy is waiting in the wings with a pen and a mullet, eager to reshape your country in their image. In the end, the world stands at a crossroads where the battle for Ukraine is not just fought with tanks and missiles, but also with narratives and electoral ballots. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Alexei Haran, Professor of Politics at the Kiev Mohyla Academy and Research Advisor at Democratic Initiatives. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
So let's begin by examining the attitude of the Ukrainian general public towards a potential peace deal. Has it changed substantially, and if so, to what extent?
Well, look, the number of people who are in favor of negotiations is increasing. So according to some of the recent polls, it's about 52 or 55% of Ukrainians. But the question is negotiations about what? And if you're talking about the so-called peace deal, because nobody doesn't understand at this point what will it mean, on what conditions? So what are the conditions? So when Ukrainians are talking about readiness to conduct negotiations for peace, it's important to understand that Ukrainians are those who would like to have peace more than any other nation, because we are suffering. But at the same time, if you're asking Ukrainians about, for example, are you ready to recognize the annexations done by Russia? Yes, exactly. This is actually the arguments against, negotiations and in favor of security guarantees. So Ukrainians will not recognize annexation of any Ukrainian territory. And frankly speaking, I believe that the international community will not recognize it as well. Then the question about security guarantees. Ukraine doesn't want to exclude NATO's integration into NATO. Vice versa, Ukrainians are in favor of joining NATO. Again, the figures are the highest possible, more than 85%. So 85%, yes. So basically, we need to understand here that in any talk about peace deal, in any configuration of the possible solutions, Ukrainians are asking for guarantees. So if they are ready to make so-called compromises, for example, to freeze the front line, which would actually mean that de facto the territories, occupied territories will remain under Putin's control. But then Ukrainians are asking, what are the security guarantees? Because Budapest Memorandum didn't work, so Ukrainians believe that it's NATO. So the question is for the West, whether the West is ready to do that. I am not sure, frankly speaking. So again, in any potential negotiations and talks about even some freezing involves the issue of security guarantees from Ukrainians.
And from what you're saying, it is safe to say that the general public would be ready to hold politicians accountable for any decisions. And if any political party said, well, we're going to negotiate, but we cannot guarantee a just peace, we cannot guarantee that there will be a security framework, the public is going to say no, right?
Well, unfortunately, if you're talking just peace, I'm not sure it's reachable at this point. If we understand by just peace, for example, I've forgotten the English, reparations from Russia, or court justice in court against war criminals. So we understand that at this point perhaps it's not doable, but at least we need to have security guarantees. So
I meant, reasonably just peace, like, because, if Ukraine won the war, which it could have done if the West helped it in 2023, this would have been a just peace to the full extent. But speaking of politics also, what would you say briefly about the way political parties in Ukraine are operating right now? This is, after all, a state of war. Is, for example, the subject of what constitutes an acceptable peace deal? Is this a subject on which parties disagree, which they use in the course of their rivalry? How does it really look like, the political scene at this difficult time?
Look, frankly speaking, we understand that any domestic instability and in the state of war is dangerous for democracy, is dangerous for the country. So, frankly speaking, and when we are discussing the potential, agreement or potential freezing of the conflict, it's very, dangerous to say, oh, this party is in favor for that, another party is in favor for that. So we know one party which is basically was pro-Russian, so we can, so-called opposition platform for life, which was very pro-Russian. Now they're trying, to transform, but this is just, the coverage operation. So we know about this party. But regarding other parties, for example, the president's party or European Solidarity Party, which is the main party of the opposition, it's very difficult now to define what would be the stance regarding, negotiations, because now we don't understand, when it will happen, in what form, a lot depend on the possibility for Ukraine to receive Western support, international support in military terms. This is very, very important. You rightly said that at the beginning of 2023, the situation was different because and it was very good if at that time we would receive enough support from the West, but we didn't. So to a certain extent, the situation on the front line deteriorated. And in this situation, again, it's very difficult to predict what would happen with Trump administration. Okay, supplies of weapons to Ukraine. And then we may, if we know about that, then it would be easier to predict. But actually, nobody's know what would be the decision of Trump at the end of the day. By the way, when I said that about military situations, we understand that Russians are moving, but very, very slowly, and their losses are huge. So we believe that it's time for Ukraine to receive more support, so we can stop the Russians. But a lot would depend on the position of our allies, and first of all, the United States. Because I think in Europe, finally, Europe understood what does it mean for Europe. So most countries are ready to continue the military support or even increase. But definitely a lot depends on the United States and personally on Trump.
Speaking of the US administration, recently we have learned that there are signals being sent to Ukraine that one of the conditions for further support would be holding elections. Why would this be a problem? All of a sudden, Ukraine is in a state of war and has decided against holding presidential elections for that very reason. Why do you think these signals about allies beginning to request Kiev to consider such an option, why has this appeared right now, all of a sudden?
Well, it's Russian trick, basically, which are saying that Zelensky is not legitimate, and unfortunately it is repeated in the West. I would say not by Western officials, but nevertheless. And we hear now something about that, about necessity for elections from Chris Kellogg, a special representative U.S. Special Representative on Russia and Ukraine. So for me, frankly speaking, it looks well, diplomatically, to say diplomatically, strange, because legally, elections can be conducted under martial law, which is inevitable during the war. And then security reasons for that. How can you conduct elections if you are all bombarded? So if you even have freezing of the war, to conduct elections would be necessary to have time. And again, guarantees, security guarantees for that. They are not here. So basically, Zelensky remains legitimate according to Ukrainian constitution. And even those who are against Zelensky, who criticize Zelensky, they are saying that it's not the right time for elections.
And how do you think did these Russian narratives make their way to the West? We've recently heard the far-right celebrity Tucker Carlson accusing Volodymyr Zelensky of being a dictator. Quite notably, he didn't actually complain about Vladimir Putin eliminating his political opponents, attacking his neighbors, etc., etc. But he was extremely furious about the prospect of supporting Zelensky because, in his words, he doesn't have democratic mandate. How do you think these narratives, which started their way at the Kremlin, this was, as you've mentioned, Russia was actually saying that pretty much from the start, why are they so popular in the West? Because this clearly shows that the discussion is going in a very unexpected and unusual direction, to say the least.
Yes, correct. Well, it's difficult for me to understand. One of the things actually is that the West, many people in the West still do not understand what's going on, which is strange for me. The third year of the war. And actually soon it will be the fourth year of the war. On February 24th, it will be the fourth year, right, of the war. So it's difficult for me to understand, these pro-Russian sentiments and inclination to accept Russia propaganda. Well, in case of Tucker Carlson, I think it's because he's, populist, right, very, very right populist. And again, we don't know what is real in his mind. We don't know for sure. So, in many cases, maybe he would like just to make, sensational statements in order to receive more money for his program, and so on and so forth. But in general, it looks, very strange for us when we see the intention, to equate the victim of aggression to aggressor. Look, Putin is dictator. We know about it. Ukraine is democratic country, but still we have this phenomenon.
So unfortunately, the tentacles of the Russian propaganda are extending their reach even into the United States, as we've seen, an issue which perhaps would require a further debate as a separate topic. For the time being, however, Professor Alexei Haran was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you very much.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Ukrainian General Viktor Nazarov has told the BBC that Ukraine's former commander-in-chief had proposed to attack Russia's Belgorod region in 2022 to protect Kharkiv. A similar plan was eventually enacted by the Ukrainian military to attack the Kursk region.
Valery Zaluzhny, Ukraine's current ambassador to the United Kingdom and its former military leader, had apparently seen the necessity of an incursion into Russian territory 2 years before it happened. He believed that a strike into the Belgorod region would prevent Russian forces from staging an attack of their own against Ukraine's Sumy region. General Nazarov said that the decision not to do so in 2022 was a, quote, political question. There had been reports circulating in early 2024 concerning Zaluzhny and the president's office not seeing eye to eye on matters of war. Zaluzhny's successor, Oleksandr Syrsky, eventually carried out a similar plan, though against the Kursk region. Ukrainian troops were able to initially seize around 1,300 square kilometers of Russian land in Kursk, though Kiev has reportedly lost around half of that since August 2024.
The breakaway Transnistria region has reportedly received gas supplies from the European Union. Since the beginning of the year, the pro-Russian region has been struggling with supplying heat and power to its residents after Russia suspended its energy deliveries.
Moldova, in agreement with the European Union, has initiated emergency gas deliveries to Transnistria. The goal is to prevent a potential humanitarian disaster. Russia's gas delivery suspension on January 1st had triggered a very severe energy crisis in Transnistria. Thousands of homes were left without access to heating and warm water, and many more were deprived of gas service. Moscow had cut the gas deliveries after Ukraine ceased to transit Russian gas through its territory to Europe. This move by Kiev was to cut off some of the funding for Russia's war effort. Simultaneously, Russia stopped gas deliveries to Moldova, citing allegedly unpaid debts to Gazprom. The decision formally ended a decades-long plan which saw Transnistria receive free gas from Russia.
The Czech Republic's opposition ANO party has threatened to stop the Prague-led initiative to purchase ammunition for Ukraine. ANO's leader vowed to take such a step should his party win the country's October elections.
In the wake of various European elections, it seems that the opponents of military aid for Ukraine are becoming emboldened in their statements. ANO, led by former Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, says that it will halt the international initiative to supply ammo to Ukraine. Some of its leaders have questioned the allegedly unsatisfactory quality of the ammunition and its prices. The initiative was kicked off by Czech President Petr Pavel, and as part of it, over 500,000 rounds of ammunition have been delivered to Kiev. A further 300,000 are planned to be supplied to the Ukrainian defense effort. Some observers have warned that if ANO returns to power, it might align the country with more pro-Russian leaders like Hungary's Viktor Orban or Slovakia's Robert Fico, both of whom have either halted or been skeptical of European military aid to Ukraine.
The Wall Street Journal says that Russia is building a new naval base in Abkhazia, the breakaway Georgian territory, which is recognized by only a handful of countries, including Russia itself. The move is reportedly raising fears that Georgia could be drawn into the war in Ukraine.
According to the report, the new base is part of Moscow's latest strategy to protect its naval forces after they had suffered serious losses in the Black Sea. Since the start of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia has either lost or sustained damage to around a third of its fleet in the Black Sea region. Although the new naval base is relatively small, experts point out that it could have the capacity to host vessels equipped with cruise missiles. This in particular would be a serious boon to Russia's presence in the Black Sea. The base is reportedly being developed in Ochamchira, which is located over 700 kilometers away from Ukraine's borders and therefore would be safe from the long-range missile strikes that Ukraine currently has the ability to carry out.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.